Welcome back to Beernid 40K. After months of working on this video, we will finally look at the Deathwatch and Kill Team and my thoughts on some tips to make the most out of them in your games. We'll talk about overcoming something big that they struggle with, some beardiness, some cheesiness, what I like for them in Commander's games, you name it. So like this video, hit that button and subscribe to Beernid 40K. And now, with that out of the way, let's talk about Deathwatch and Kill Team. The Space Marines have long been considered generalists in games of 40k, with adaptability being one of their hallmarks. Yet in Kill Team, you want to use your roster to best effect to create multiple hard counters for the myriad missions and enemy factions you will come across. So you're going to need to have a versatile roster, yet one that contains multiple kill teams, each made to achieve a specific goal and beat a specific faction or archetype. Otherwise, if you only have a single team and try to take on whatever comes at you, you're probably going to find that no matter what faction you're playing, the opponent does a better job than you at some aspect of the game, whether it be melee, shooting, or holding objectives. So in Kill Team, I never recommend just taking a single team. And in the Deathwatch, if you just take, like, say, 5 good guys, you're not going to do the best in my experience. One of the main things that any Marine equivalent faction has to deal with is the potential of plasma spam, which can wipe out entire teams in a single round of shooting, in the cases of things like, say, AdMech and Imperial Guard. Yet the Deathwatch has an answer for this that other Marine factions in Kill Team do not: Storm Shields. Storm Shields in Kill Team give your Marine a 3-up invuln, making them very survivable and able to get into close combat, something that a lot of dedicated plasma spam lists do not like you to do. You have great shooting options in the Deathwatch, but if you're playing the Men in Black, you do not want to sit there toe-to-toe and try to outshoot lists that have 6 to 8 guns that can each kill a Marine easily. Instead, against great shooting, you want to go for more of a melee-focused kill team. So in your roster, I recommend taking a few dedicated models with Storm Shields to bring against plasma spam lists so that you can survive the slog into CC despite the danger and kill the other team in melee. Currently, I have 3 of these models in my roster, each of which is just a normal veteran and not a sergeant or a black shield. And on that note, ideally, I would love to include a black shield with Storm Shield in more games, but the increased price of the model over standard Deathwatch Marines, coupled with the price of his weapon upgrades, just makes it hard to fit him in a list unless I build it specifically around him, because you also need a good leader, other models with shields, and say a Frag Cannon or something like that. So usually I'll likely just stick to regular Marines with Storm Shields when I need to get stuck in close combat. But the question then becomes, what weapon do you take with them? A lot of the times, power swords are a good choice on melee Marines, but I really like the power mauls versus opponents with a lot of toughness 3 around, which includes the Guard and AdMech plasma spam lists I've been talking about so far. With strength 4 base on our Marines, the +2 strength of the maul brings each of your Marines to strength 6, so you wound Guard, most Tau, and AdMech on 2s with the maul. Statistically, this gives you a slightly better outcome versus regular Guardsmen if you compare the math hammer of the sword and the power maul. Since the majority of plasma spam factions are toughness 3, I think power mauls are usually what you're going to want to be taking when you put Storm Shields on some guys and try to get inside the lines of a plasma spam list. However, as Deathwatch, you can actually field a lot of plasma weapons yourself potentially. The Watch Sergeant and Veterans can all take combi plasmas, letting you pump out both special issue ammunition and plasma in a single round of shooting. However, I've tried to think about this, and there is not a case where I would personally run all plasma on my own Deathwatch team. I've thought about this, and there's just not a situation that comes up. So let me know in the comments if you can think of something that perhaps I haven't thought about yet. Is there a faction, a mission, something specific where you would take an all combi plasma list? Let me know about it. The thing is that the cost of the Marines themselves brings you to a maximum of 5 in an all-combi plasma list, the same number as if you were taking Frag Cannons or any other weapons. And including the Watch Sergeant as the 5th model, this brings you to 92 points. Compare that with the Imperial Guard that can take 8 plasmas and a Tempester with Power Fist and another plasma in the form of a pistol for 97 points. And you're going to see that part of the plasma spam game is numbers, which the Deathwatch just don't have. So if I'm going to go for a shooty list, I'm going to try to add at least 1 Frag Cannon in the team because they can put out a similar amount of fire and damage to the plasma gun, but you don't run the risk of blowing yourself up along the way. And unlike the plasma gun, the Frag Cannon is good against Marines and Hordes if you're able to get good positioning and make use of the specific profile that you need against the faction that you're facing. The Frag Cannon's damage output also gets better as the game progresses, and you get closer in, making them ideal for controlling the center of the board, in my experience. In fact, in my last game versus Plasma Spam, I had a single Frag Cannon guy, even though I was mainly going for dominance and melee with the Storm Shield builds I mentioned earlier, and this single Frag Cannon did some work in the game. If you run a Frannon up against a blob of enemy plasma just sitting on a gun line, even if they kill him, the Deathwatch has the tactic, only in death does duty end, that costs 2 command points. Yes, it's expensive, and it requires you to keep that 2 CP in reserve, but this guy puts out 2d6 auto-hitting shots with the frag template, and if you die, you can just use only in death to let him shoot anyway, even if he already shot that round. This means there's a potential 4d6 shots that he can spray out in a single turn. And in my last game, I had one Frag Cannon guy just literally right outside of close combat from 5 guys saying, "What are you going to do?" If you try to charge him, that would be 2d6 auto-hitting shots going on a single guy in Overwatch. If I survive long enough to get to shoot with him, that was 2d6 auto-hitting shots spread out however I wanted amongst 5 enemy models, since they're close enough that I could split shots from a central target and still hit most of them. And if they kill the guy in shooting, well, I spend the command points that I had been saving and shoot all of those guys anyway. So he just ended up standing there next to a blob of guys. My opponent tried to shoot him and he wouldn't die. He had 3 flesh wounds on him by the end of the game, but since his weapon was auto-hitting, the -1 penalty for 2 of those flesh wounds wasn't going to be bothering him. So Frag Cannons are very good, very dangerous, and very scary to face, and they help you to control the board. However, the prevailing thought a lot of people have is to spam these things and just take 4 Frag Cannons and a basic leader, yet I don't like this all-cannon build much in theory. First, Fragwatch is not as broken as people think. Yes, they can put out a lot of shots, but at the end of the day, they're expensive, and that only gets you 1 wound and a 3-up save to carry the gun. AP and multiple damage weapons are everywhere in Kill Team, and just that makes the all-cannon build too squishy for me. They can't use special issue ammunition, so their max range is 24 inches. They're only doing 2 shots at that range, with at least one -1 penalty applied, since you're going to be at long range there. This means that you have to close the distance and get to a decent position before you start being able to use the cannons reliably. So I like to sprinkle 1 to 2 of these in my lists in games where doing so makes sense. They're great in a midfield position, like I said, but personally I don't see myself going for the 4 Frag Cannon cheese because doing so can actually hurt you just as much as help you. The fact that they do so well in mid-board means that you kind of want to also focus on the other aspects, the backfield and the front of the board, if possible. And speaking of that, speaking of cheese, I do have a fun thing that I came up with myself that I haven't really seen anybody else taking advantage of just yet. You see, I really like stacking theoretical buffs in Kill Team to see how gross something can get, or how survivable it can get, or how different models or tactics can interact with specialisms or weapons. I call these builds engines, and I do this for fun even if I never use them on the tabletop. I'll share one of these with you, but be warned that, like most things, this also has pros and cons, and I've even had somebody get pretty salty about this despite it being used in a competitive game. There are a lot of options here, and you can pick and choose how many you want or need to apply. I'll try to explain it the best that I can, but if you have any questions or if there's something you don't quite understand, just ask me about it in the comments and I'll do my best to explain it. Like I said, this is something I've kind of been working on myself, and I haven't seen anybody else using it with their Deathwatch yet, so if you just go ask somebody on Reddit about it, they might not know what you're talking about initially unless you explain it to them first. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's talk cheese and stacking buffs. The Infernus Heavy Bolter has a tactic called Hellfire Shells for 1 command point. The way this works is you pay 1 CP, and instead of shooting the Heavy Bolter profile as normal, you make a single hit roll for the weapon. If it hits, you automatically deal D3 mortal wounds. They don't get a chance to save, it just instantly deals the mortal wounds if the shot hits. So what we're going to try to do is make that have the best chance of hitting possible. And what this becomes is almost like a 36-inch Cybolt that just drops D3 mortal wounds wherever you need it. And in games versus things like Commanders, or games with Lictors or Warriors running around, or anytime you pretty much just need something dead, this is pretty awesome to have. Like I said, how far you build this engine is up to you. It's just about trying to make this the most accurate shot possible. You might decide to add less buffs to the stack, and that's fine, but in competition, I do maximize this quite a bit. So the first part of building this engine is to take a Infernus Heavy Bolter. Next, you want a cheap intercessor with an Auspex, and you're going to make him a comms specialist. You're going to keep him next to your Infernus Heavy Bolter. The Infernus has a 36-inch range, so nothing is really ever going to be outside of range, and oftentimes not much is going to be outside of half range after turn 1. He hits on 3s normally, but if the Intercessor puts the comms scanner ability on him and the Auspex, he gets a +1 to hit and ignores obscuring terrain. Suddenly, you have a much better chance of hitting with that single shot of the Infernus Bolter, because now you have a weapon with a 36-inch range, buffed with a +1 to hit, that also ignores obscured penalties. Suddenly, that mortal wound is going off on 2s and 3s. This is the minimum build for the engine, but you can still do things like make the Infernus a sniper specialist, for example, so that now you're hitting on 2s, re-rolling 1s within 18 inches. So here's a little list of all the possible interactions and stacks that you could possibly use. It's just an itemized thing. You can pick what you want, add it onto there to make this the most accurate thing that you need it to be. But I really like this, as it effectively lets you delete a really important model on turn 1. And since it only costs 1 command point to get this stack of death going normally, you can even use a command point reroll for an injury roll, for example, if you need to, which gives this kind of like a bit more insurance that the model you want to delete goes away. So imagine you get the mortal wound off, you roll an injury roll, but it's only going to be a flesh wound. You can command point reroll that if you keep that 1 CP in reserve. So is this going to work every time? No, it's just a great stack of cheese to have in your roster, and because of this, I never see the need to bring more than a few frag cannons in competition. For 18 points, I get the Infernus instead of 21 points for the frag cannon. I usually have an Intercessor comms guy in the list anyway, so instead of having him buff a frag cannon or something, I just keep those guys towards the midfield like I've been talking about, and the Infernus engine towards the backfield if a good position allows this. Another reason that this works well is that the special issue ammunition on the Intercessor goes great with the bolt rifle, which comes with a 30-inch range to begin with. So the 36-inch Infernus and 30-inch base bolt rifle Intercessor make a really nice pair. So frag cannons are great, but they're not one-shot killing level 4 specialists from across the board, sitting safely in the backfield, the way this Infernus engine has done for me since the first time I did this. So I thought I'd mention this in case you hadn't thought of it yet. Of course, it's not the most sustainable build to bring, because it takes at least 1 specialism to bring the comms Intercessor with Auspex and at least 1 CP for the Hellfire tactic. And if you were not already bringing an Intercessor comms specialist, the points cost for this can get pretty staggering. But when all of this goes off, you'll be glad that you brought it. And just as a bit of fun, I thought I'd mention that rattling this all off is crazy. People look at you like, dear God, what have you done? It's like you've done a dark ritual and they walked in the middle of it or something. So there's a lot going on, and it's important that your opponent understands all of it. So declaring all of this sounds something like, okay, so top of the shooting phase, I assign the Auspex and Comm Specialist scanner ability onto the Infernus Heavy Bolter. Next, I use the Hellfire Shells tactic for 1 CP. He now has a +1 to hit, is ignoring obscured penalties, and I make a single hit roll instead of firing the weapon as normal. If it hits, I instantly deal D3 mortal wounds from the Hellfire Shell tactic. So he hits on 3s normally. The weapon has a 36-inch range, and you're 17 inches away, so you're not at long range. You are obscured, but the Auspex assignment ignores that penalty. So I'm back to hitting on 3s. Now the +1 from the scanner ability has me hitting on 2s, and since the Infernus Gunner is a sniper specialist, he's re-rolling 1s. So altogether, he's hitting on 2s, re-rolling 1s, and if it hits, I deal D3 mortal wounds. So that's enough about that for now. Like I said, if you have any questions, just let me know. The math hammer on this works out to a 97% chance of a hit if you're hitting on 2s, re-rolling 1s, a 77% chance to hit if you don't invest extra buffs like the Auspex or something, and you go down to the shot hitting on 3s, re-rolling 1 by keeping him a sniper specialist. If you take him without being a sniper specialist, but still buff him to hit on 2s, you're at an 83% chance to hit. And statistically, the average result, of course, of D3 mortal wounds is going to be 2 either way. Now let's talk a bit about special issue ammunition. Included in the cost of your Deathwatch model's standard bolt weapons is the ability to choose a modifier to improve the weapon's performance. This makes standard Deathwatch models even more expensive than standard Astartes. So if you're bringing over a few Primaris Reavers or Intercessors, they cost a bit more to field in the Deathwatch than they do if you take them with the Adeptus Astartes faction. But this is completely worth it, in my opinion. The versatility this brings adds a lot to your ability to tailor a Marine to a specific opponent or situation as it arises. So imagine, are you outside of half range? Well, instead of taking a -1 penalty, you can add 6 inches and an additional AP -1 to your gun's range with Kraken bolts, bringing, say, an Intercessor with a bolt gun to a staggering 36-inch range and AP -2 instantly. Now they're firing 2 shots at full ballistic skill 3 within 18 inches at AP -2. Or maybe you're fighting Death Guard. Hellfire rounds always wound on a 2. So if you were to only bring basic Deathwatch veteran Marines, you can take 6 with a Watch Sergeant, all armed with bolters for exactly 100 points, and all 7 of those Marines are running around with the equivalent of a Strength 10 weapon. And Dragonfire bolts, they're great too. They give you a +1 to hit against obscured targets, which lets you eliminate the most common penalty that shooting armies are going to encounter. On intercessors with bolt rifles, this pretty much keeps you hitting on 3s since they have a half range of 15 inches base. So imagine, you have an enemy model in a position that's putting a long range and obscured penalty on your shot, so that would be at a -2. Instead of adding range with the Kraken bolts and still taking a -1 to hit because the opponent is hiding, you can choose to move the model up 6 inches instead, add these Dragonfire bolts on top, and now you're back to hitting on 3s. And finally, the Vengeance rounds, they subtract 6 inches from the rifle but add an additional AP-2 to the weapon's stat line, bringing an intercessor to AP-3 with a bolt rifle. I don't use this one quite as much, but when I have it, always seems to make a difference. If you have buffs like rival chapters active, or an unassigned comms or auspex buff to pass off, this added on top can work to create a nice little stack. Statistically, the Vengeance rounds leads to more wounds from the AP- on intercessors with bolt guns than the wound on 2s from Hellfire if you compare them both hitting at ballistic skill 3. However, if you're using a different weapon than the bolt rifle, like the auto bolt rifle or the standard bolter, or if you would be brought down to a single shot by the reduction of 6 inches from your weapon's range, for example, the Hellfire becomes a better choice again. Now, shotguns get a quick mention here because they also have a pseudo special issue ammunition choice, but I'm not a fan of the weapons in general when compared to the mountain of other great choices in this faction. If you could also take a melee weapon with these, it might change my mind, but since you can't, and getting really specific with these lists is what brings victory for the Deathwatch, I have to say I haven't found a place for these in my roster just yet. If you found a good way to use them that is better than other loadouts and other strategies that I've mentioned so far, let me know in the comments because I'd love to hear about it. And lastly, I wanted to talk commanders. I'll keep this short since the video is already getting a bit long. Simply put, I hate the Watchmaster. He's just too expensive, even at lower levels, and in a faction that's just weighed down to the max on points. He's going to cause issues against optimal commander builds against the strategists and psychers that are out there. Can he work in a non-competitive meta? Sure, why not? But you know what? Going against some of these optimal builds, he's not going to be the best thing. What I really wish we had access to is the Primaries Lieutenant from the Astartes faction, since he would really complement this faction as a strategist specialist. However, we can't take him in the Deathwatch, so my #1 pick is the Primaries Librarian. His ability to spam 2 mortal wounds per turn with Cybele, even at level 1, paired with the Infernus engine we talked about earlier, make Deathwatch able to drop as many as 5 mortal wounds in a single turn, which can devastate an enemy faction. D3 mortal wounds from the Infernus and 2 Cybelts, that's going to cost you 2 CP per turn. Add in some Frag Cannons, some intercessors with bolt guns that can wound Death Guard on 2s, and even just regular guys with special issue ammunition and plasma coming from their combi weapons, and Deathwatch can be devastating in Commanders games. However, I know not everybody just wants to run a librarian, so if you want to try something different, a low-level Primaris captain can potentially work too. He's definitely not as competitive, but making him a strategist spec is probably one of the most competitive builds to do with him. But you're going to want to keep him as cheap as possible, and I don't see him or any of the other options as being nearly as strong as the librarian. Unfortunately, the strategist specialism really only starts to be amazing at level 3 or above, so this hurts the captain. But even at level 1, you can take the tactical planner upgrade on him and start the game with 3 plus D3 command points, which can greatly help the performance of your kill team. However, just know you can do pretty much the same thing with the Primaris Librarian by taking the Tactical Planner upgrade on him as well. So in my opinion, again, the competitive choice for Deathwatch in most situations is going to be that Primaris Librarian, taken as a level 1 Psyker Specialist, and the Tactical Planner upgrade for 15 points, which lets you start the game with an additional D3 command points. So that's it. In closing, Deathwatch are an elite team, sitting somewhere about tier 1.5 in my opinion. They have an answer for most factions. They have amazing weapons with great standard rulebook CP tactics. I'm not talking about what comes in their Get Started box. Out of the rulebook, their tactics are really good. Yet they're very expensive. And their low body count of 5 to 7 models means they struggle in objective games versus hordes. And unfortunately, if you're upgrading them in something like your campaigns, the low model count can mean that your team might actually get worse instead of better. So I really hope you've enjoyed this video. Like I said earlier, it took 2 months of playtesting and building an entire roster of models to do, plus hours of Math Hammer, obsessing, scripting, recording, talking to friends, editing, you name it. If this helped you, then be sure to give a thumbs up, and as always, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Also, did I miss something, or do you see something different in your games with the Men in Black? Did this help you out in your games? Let me know about it in the comments, and I'll talk with you again soon here on BeerNed 40K.